Hey guys, Hailey Lain, aka Keep Black here, and welcome to another episode of Off the Cuff. This time I wanted to talk to you guys about a little game called Snatcher. If you guys aren't familiar with the game, Snatcher is a game created by Hideo Kojima for, I believe, the MSX2, although it's been ported to the Sega Saturn in Japanese, as well as the Sega CD in English. And if you guys aren't familiar with Hideo Kojima, he's the guy who made Metal Gear Solid. You know, I didn't really know much of anything about Hideo Kojima until I finally played the Metal Gear Solid series, which, you know, my friends C and Juan had been trying to get me to play for years. They finally got me playing Metal Gear Solid 5 and then Metal Gear Rising, and then it wasn't until I met Jess, and in particular Mon Pian, that I finally sat down and played through the entire Metal Gear Solid series. That in and of itself is a topic for an entirely other video, and I don't want to get too off the rails here, but I thoroughly enjoyed those games, and once I was done, I wanted more. And so I got really curious about what other games Hideo Kojima had produced. Mon Pian told me about Snatcher and also his other creation, Policenauts. I never played Policenauts, but I did get real curious about Snatcher. And when I finally found a way to play Snatcher, I did a live stream series of videos on my channel on YouTube, right here. They're still up, actually. Of me playing the game for the very first time and reacting to it live. Now, you know, of course, along with a lot of my older videos, my reactions were very much theatrical, overly so. I was definitely mugging for the camera, but I did sincerely, thoroughly enjoy the game. You know, I really liked the movie Blade Runner, I really liked Terminator 2, and I'd heard of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, still haven't watched that one. But I was really interested in the premise of Snatcher, and I really enjoy kind of like the cyberpunky sort of aesthetic that it does, especially like the particular noir kind of take that it has on it. I've mentioned before, I'm a sucker for the noir aesthetic, and plus you've got a detective main character, you know, you can't go wrong. You know, it doesn't hurt that he's attractive as well. I also had a massive crush on Random Hajil, you guys might remember that, if you guys were there for those live streams. I thought the story was phenomenal, I really enjoyed the music, and especially the 80s voice acting. It's like, ah yes, give me that good cringy old, like, bad anime dub quality. Somehow it made it feel that much more authentic to like an 80s movie vibe. So I decided to start digging into as much Snatcher stuff as I possibly could, you know, looking up fan art, finding as many song covers as I possibly could. I ended up running into somebody who I made fast friends with, who also calls herself Random Hajil on most online platforms. You know, we chatted a lot about Snatcher, of course. We gushed about ideas for how the story might have continued if it had had a sequel. And I'm pretty sure she was the one who introduced me to SD Snatcher. If you guys aren't aware, apparently SD Snatcher is pretty famous for being the first video game to have a full English translation from Japanese done entirely by fans. You know, it's got its problems, it's not exactly the most accurate translation, but it made the game playable. And, you know, there's also a newer translation that's much more updated, it's very, you know, much more accurate and also true to the spirit of the game. But it's, you know, it's just kind of an interesting factoid. But what really caught my attention about SD Snatcher was that it had a revised version of the story from Snatcher. It wasn't just a direct, you know, copy-paste, here's the story of Snatcher, now make an RPG out of it. It almost felt like a draft 2. Like, all the things that I wished had happened in Snatcher happened in SD Snatcher. Now, it doesn't actually continue further on from the story, so it doesn't tell us what might have happened next, but all the things where you could kind of feel like, something else could have happened here while playing Snatcher, or at least I felt that way, all of that happened in SD Snatcher. And now, spoilers here, because I can't talk about this without addressing spoilers. Random Hajil passes away pretty dramatically in the original Snatcher. He sacrifices himself to destroy the bad guy, and like he holds him steady as his space laser comes down and blasts the place apart. But in SD Snatcher, the final battle is modified so that you first off have a different final boss, but you also have what I think is a more kind of compelling motivation for Random's character, as well as a better and more fulfilling finale to his participation in the story. Instead of a space laser in SD Snatcher, it's a nuclear bomb, if I'm not mistaken. You know, Random still does the heroic thing and tries to deactivate it personally, but he survives this time. And so, of course, as the resident player who has a massive crush on Random, I really like that version of the story. I'm not much of an RPG player, so the gameplay, in my opinion, is kind of a drag, although I understand it is very well-designed RPG gameplay, so that's not a knock on the game, it's just me, I don't like grinding. I won't even play a Pokemon game these days. I don't recall the full production story behind Snatcher and SD Snatcher, but what I do remember is that Snatcher had kind of a multi-part release where the full game was so amazingly detailed and cinematic and so far beyond all of what other games could do at that time, you know, classic Hideo Kojima, that it couldn't all fit on one disc. That may sound familiar to you from Metal Gear Solid 1. And so by the time that he got Part 2 out for Snatcher, Part 3 hadn't been finished yet, and they actually ran out of time to create it, so Parts 1 and 2 were released separately, and it never got its final conclusion until a much later release. And I believe SD Snatcher was released in between that time. So I really do wonder if SD Snatcher is actually Draft 2 of the story, because Chapter 3 of the original Snatcher is notably less player involved, and when it is player involved, it is ridiculously difficult, and it has your classic Hideo Kojima style info dump at the end of the story. What I'd personally recommend if you guys are curious about this game, first off, both are fantastic. Second off, I'd personally recommend Snatcher, the original Snatcher, for the cinematics and the gameplay novelty and originality. It really is and was ahead of its time. And for the storytelling, I'd say play SD Snatcher. It's not just the fact that random survives, like there's a lot more cool stuff that happens in the story that I think adds to it, and I think it has a more satisfying ending to the game as well. But both games have some of the best video game soundtracks I've ever heard, both on very simple and limited hardware, but you know, very effective, as well as some really fantastic artwork, really fantastic storytelling. Again, highly recommend. If you can find a way to play this game, definitely do so. It's also Christmas themed, so there you go, it's a Christmas holiday game. At any rate, guys, thank you so much for listening and for watching. This is another fun one to talk about, and I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. As usual, please leave your questions and comments in the comments section, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks again!